This 4-year-old beggar girl screamed in pain after being burned with a cigarette until a millionaire took justice into his own hands. Comment what you think will happen. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. The scorching midday sun beat down on the dusty streets of Harmony Creek, Mississippi, when the desperate cries of a child echoed along Main Street. Iris, just 6 years old, was huddled on the ground, clutching her left arm while tears streamed down her dirt-streaked face. The smell of burned flesh mingled with the sweltering afternoon heat, and the drunk who had pressed the lit cigarette against her skin was already staggering away, laughing as if he had pulled off a great prank. The girl wore a faded pink dress, full of patches and holes which had once been too big for her and now hung loosely on her thin frame. Her bare feet were cracked and dirty, revealing weeks of life on the streets. She tried to hold back her tears, biting her lower lip hard, but the pain was too intense. Damian Blackwood was leaving the hardware store when he heard the screams. At 52, the entrepreneur who owned the largest cotton gin in the county had developed a habit of keeping his eyes down when walking through town. He preferred to avoid eye contact with people, especially after losing Eleanor 2 years before. But those cries of suffering made him stop immediately. When he saw the scene, a wounded child on the ground while people hurried past pretending not to notice, something inside him revolted. It wasn't just compassion, it was a mix of anger and urgency that he hadn't felt in a long time. Damian rushed to Iris, kneeling beside her without caring about the dirt that would stain his dress pants. "It's okay, honey. I'm going to help you," he said in a firm but gentle voice, examining the burn on her arm. The mark was red and swollen, clearly needing immediate medical attention. Iris looked at him with wide, frightened eyes, but there was something in her gaze that surprised him. It wasn't just fear, but a sharp intelligence that seemed to be evaluating whether she could trust him. Without hesitation, Damian scooped her up in his arms and ran to his car. During the drive to the small county hospital, Iris remained quiet, only sobbing softly and watching his every move closely. Her little hands clung to his shirt, as if it were her only point of safety in the world. At the hospital, while the doctors treated the burn, Damian discovered that no one had looked for the girl. She had been alone for 3 months, ever since her grandmother, Eulalia, had passed away from pneumonia that she couldn't afford to treat properly. The social worker explained that Iris had simply disappeared from the funeral home, and no one else had bothered to look for her. "She doesn't have anyone else?" Damian asked, watching through the glass as nurses bandaged the girl's arm. "No one who cares about her," the social worker replied with a weary sigh. "The grandmother was a widow. The girl's parents died when she was a baby. Iris has been living off handouts on the streets." At that moment, looking at that wounded and abandoned child, Damian felt something he hadn't experienced in 2 years: purpose. Since Eleanor's death, he had been living as if he were floating, just going through the basic motions of life without really living. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. But Iris awakened in him an urgent need to act, to protect, to make a difference. "Is she going to an orphanage?" he asked. "Probably to a shelter in Jackson. Here in Harmony Creek, we don't have adequate facilities for cases like this." The idea of Iris being sent away to yet another place where she would just be another number revolted Damian deeply. Without fully thinking about the consequences, he made a decision that would change their lives forever. "I want to take her home," he said, surprising even himself with the firmness in his voice. The social worker frowned. "Mr. Blackwood, it's not that simple. There are legal procedures, psychological evaluations." "Then let's start those procedures," Damian interrupted. "But in the meantime, she's not going to Jackson. I'll take responsibility for her." When Iris came out of the examination room, With her arm bandaged, she found Damien waiting for her with a determined expression that she couldn't quite decipher. He knelt down to her level again and asked softly, "Iris, would you like to come home with me? At least until we get that arm all better." The girl studied him for long seconds. At 6 years old, she had already learned to distrust adults, but there was something in the man's eyes that seemed different. It wasn't pity, nor false kindness. It was something deeper, as if he really saw her as a person, not just as a problem to be solved. Slowly, she nodded her head. The drive to Damien's mansion was silent, but Iris observed everything with impressive attention for her age. The house was located on the outskirts of town, surrounded by pecan trees and cotton fields, a spacious 2-story building with a wide porch and well-maintained gardens. For a girl who had spent the last few months sleeping in doorways and begging for food, it looked like a palace. Beatrice, the housekeeper, appeared at the front door as soon as she heard the car arrive. At 45, she had worked for the Blackwood family for over a decade and knew Damien well enough to realize that something important had happened. Her eyebrows furrowed when she saw him get out of the car carrying a dirty, wounded girl. "Damien, what?" "Beatrice, this is Iris. She's going to stay with us for a while," he said, his voice carrying a tone that brooked no argument. But there was something in Beatrice's worried look that indicated that this decision would bring consequences that even Damien hadn't fully considered. Beatrice crossed her arms, watching Damien carry Iris up the stairs. She had known her boss long enough to recognize that determined look, but she also knew that he hadn't been thinking clearly since Eleanor's death. The housekeeper followed him to the guest room, where he gently placed the girl on the bed. "I need to talk to you," Beatrice said in a low voice, pulling Damien into the hallway. "In the kitchen. Now." Iris was alone in the room, her eyes scanning every detail of the room. The mattress was as soft as a cloud compared to the doorways where she had slept in recent months. The walls were painted a soft yellow. There were lace curtains on the windows and a large closet made of dark wood. For her, who possessed only the clothes on her back, the space seemed gigantic. In the kitchen, Beatrice didn't mince words. "Damien, for God's sake, what are you thinking? You can't just bring a strange child into the house." "She's not a stranger," he replied, pouring himself a glass of water with trembling hands. "It's Iris. She's 6 years old and just got burned by a drunk in the street. And that gives you the right to decide her future alone." Beatrice lowered her voice, but maintained her firm tone. "You're acting out of guilt, Damien. I know you still blame yourself for Eleanor, but this girl isn't going to bring her back." The words hit Damien like a punch in the stomach. He knew that Beatrice was right about the guilt. It had been eating at him since that terrible night, 2 years ago. But there was something more to his decision to help Iris, something that he himself couldn't fully explain. "It's not about Eleanor," he lied. "It's about doing what's right." "What's right is to follow the legal procedures," Beatrice retorted. "You could get into serious trouble for this, and so could the girl." That first night, Iris barely slept. It wasn't just because she was in a strange place, but because of the nightmares that had haunted her since her grandmother's death. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the face of the man who had burned her, smelled the cigarette smoke, relived the pain. Around 3 in the morning, her screams echoed through the house. Damien woke up immediately and ran to the room. He found Iris sitting on the bed, trembling and sweating, her eyes wide with terror. Without thinking twice, he sat on the edge of the bed and hugged her gently. "It was just a nightmare," he murmured, feeling her little body shake against his chest. "You're safe now." Beatrice appeared in the doorway, observing the scene. There was something touching in the way Damien comforted the girl, a tenderness that she hadn't seen in him for a long time. Maybe, she thought, this situation could be good for both of them. The following days were challenging. Iris refused to eat properly, nibbling only small pieces of bread and fruit. She followed Damien around the house like a shadow, but didn't talk much. Beatrice tried to engage her in conversations, but the girl only responded with gestures or whispered words. It was on the fourth day that something extraordinary happened. Damien was in the living room, flipping through factory papers, when he heard a sound coming from the piano. Eleanor used to play some simple pieces, and he himself had tinkered with the keys in his youth, but the house had been musically silent since her death. Curious, he approached the music room and found Iris sitting on the piano bench, her little hands gliding across the keys with impressive precision. She was playing a Chopin waltz, a complex piece that he himself had never been able to master completely. "Where did you learn that?" he asked, amazed. Iris stopped playing and looked at him shyly. "Grandma Eulalia always hummed it. She said Daddy knew how to play before he passed." "But you never had piano lessons?" She shook her head. "Just listened. There's a bar near the square that plays music like that on Sundays. I stood outside listening." Damien was silent, processing what he had just witnessed. The girl had reproduced a complex piece of music from memory, just from having heard it a few times. This was more than natural talent. It was an exceptional gift. "Would you like to learn more songs?" he asked softly. Iris's eyes sparkled for the first time since she had arrived at the house. "Can I?" "Of course you can." It was at that moment that Beatrice, who was watching from the doorway, began to understand that maybe Damien had seen something in that girl that she herself hadn't yet realized. There was a brilliant intelligence behind those sad eyes, an inner strength that had allowed her to survive alone on the streets. During the following week, Iris spent hours at the piano. Damien taught her the simpler pieces he remembered, and she absorbed them with frightening ease. In a matter of days, she was already playing melodies that it had taken him months to learn in his youth. Beatrice also began to approach the girl, teaching her basic things like how to bathe properly, brush her teeth and comb her hair. Iris was a diligent student, observing everything carefully and repeating the gestures with meticulous care. "You're very smart," Beatrice said one afternoon, while teaching Iris how to fold clothes. "I bet you're good with numbers too." To test her, she took out some coins and started doing simple calculations. Iris not only answered correctly, but did the calculations faster than Beatrice herself. "My goodness," muttered the housekeeper. "Have you ever been to school?" "Grandma taught me to read a little," Iris replied. "But not school. She said it was too expensive." That night, Beatrice sought out Damien in his office. "That girl is special," she said bluntly. "It's not just the piano. She has an extraordinary intelligence." "I know," Damien replied, closing the book he was reading. "That's why I can't let her go to a regular shelter. She needs special opportunities. And you think you can give that to her?" Damien looked out the window, watching Iris in the garden, playing alone with a doll that Beatrice had bought for her. "I don't know if I can, but I know I need to try." It was at this moment that the phone rang. It was Valerie, Damien's sister, calling from Jackson. Her voice sounded worried and urgent. "Damien, I need to talk to you. I'm hearing you've brought a girl home. Is that true?" "Yes, it's true." "Oh God, Damien, you can't do that without the proper legal procedures. This could cause a lot of trouble for you." "What kind of trouble?" "The kind that can ruin your reputation and put you in a very complicated legal situation. I'm catching the first flight to Harmony Creek tomorrow. Don't do anything else until I get there." When Damien hung up the phone, he felt a weight in his stomach. He looked again at Iris in the garden and realized that the fight to keep her was just beginning. Valerie Blackwood arrived the next morning like a hurricane. At 48, the criminal lawyer had built a solid reputation in Jackson defending complex cases, and her posture was always that of someone who doesn't accept half measures. She parked her rental car in front of her brother's house with the determination of someone who had come to solve a problem before it became a disaster. Iris was in the garden, when she saw the woman in the navy blue suit get out of the car, carrying a leather briefcase and a severe expression. The girl ran inside the house, looking for Damien, but found him in the living room already waiting for his sister with a trembling cup of coffee in his hands. "Where is she?" were Valerie's first words upon entering the house, dispensing with any cordial greetings. "Valerie, before anything else, you need to meet her," Damien said, trying to maintain a calm tone. "Iris is a special girl. Damien, I didn't come here to meet anyone. I came to solve this problem before it becomes irreversible." Valerie slammed the briefcase onto the coffee table. "Do you have any idea what could happen if the authorities find out you're sheltering a minor without proper documentation?" "She was suffering on the streets, Valerie. I couldn't just—" "You couldn't decide that alone," she interrupted. "There are proper institutions for that, legal procedures. What you did could be interpreted as kidnapping." The word kidnapping hit Damien like a slap. He had never thought of it that way. For him, it had been an act of compassion, but he was beginning to understand the legal ramifications of his impulsive decision. Beatrice appeared in the doorway of the living room, bringing a tray with coffee and cookies. "Excuse me," she said, diplomatically. "Valerie, it's been a long time." "Beatrice," Valerie replied dryly, before turning her attention back to her brother. "Where are the girl's documents? Birth certificate, vaccination records, school transcripts?" "She doesn't have any," Damien admitted. "Her grandmother passed away 3 months ago, and there was no one else responsible for her." "So you know nothing about her family history? Possible distant relatives, nothing?" "I know her name is Iris, that her parents died when she was a baby, and that she lived with her grandmother, Eulalia. More than that. More than that you should have found out before bringing her home." Valerie opened her briefcase and pulled out some documents. "I brought the forms to regularize the situation. We're turning her over to Child Protective Services today." It was at this moment that Iris appeared timidly in the doorway of the living room. She had changed out of her torn dress into a simple outfit that Beatrice had bought for her. Her hair was clean and combed, and she still wore the bandage from her burn on her arm. But what was most striking were her eyes, intelligent, observant, clearly following every word of the adult's conversation. "This is Iris," Damien said softly, reaching out his hand for the girl to come closer. Valerie looked at the child, and for a brief moment her severe expression wavered. There was something touching about that small, thin girl, but she quickly regained her professional composure. "Hello, Iris," she said in a neutral tone. "I'm Valerie, Damien's sister." "Hi," Iris replied softly, instinctively moving closer to Damien. "Valerie, before we make any decisions, you need to see what she can do," Damien said, leading the group into the music room. "Damien, I won't let myself be swayed by—" But Valerie's words died in her throat when Iris sat down at the piano and began to play a Mozart sonata with a technique impressive for any child, let alone one who had never had formal lessons. The music filled the room with a melancholic beauty that made everyone fall silent. When Iris finished, Valerie was clearly shaken. As a mother of 2, she knew how to recognize exceptional talent when she saw it, but her legal training forced her to keep her focus on the legal problem. "It's impressive," she admitted, "but that doesn't change the fact that the situation is irregular. In fact, it makes everything more complicated." "How so?" Damien asked. "A child with that level of skill should be in a specialized institution with qualified teachers. You don't have pedagogical or musical training to properly develop her potential." Valerie's words hurt Damien more than he expected. He had begun to imagine himself as a father figure to Iris, but perhaps his sister was right about his limitations. "Furthermore," Valerie continued, "without proper documentation, we can't even enroll her in a school. And if someone reports the situation to the authorities—" "Who would report it?" Beatrice asked. Anyone who considers it irregular for a single man to be sheltering an orphaned girl, neighbors, factory workers, even well-intentioned people who think they're protecting the child. Damien felt the world spinning around him. He had made a decision driven by his heart, but hadn't considered all the practical consequences. And now he was realizing that his good intention could end up hurting the very person he wanted to help. "So, what do you suggest?" he asked, resigned. "We go to Child Protective Services today. I'll explain the situation, emphasize that your intentions were noble, and we'll ask to regularize temporary guardianship through the proper channels. And if they deny it, then Iris goes to a shelter until they find a suitable family to adopt her." The silence that followed was heavy. Iris, who had remained quiet throughout the conversation, looked from one adult to another, clearly understanding that her stay in the house was being questioned. "I don't want to go away," she said finally, her voice small but firm. "Here I have a piano, and Damien lets me play." The simple words of the girl touched everyone present. Valerie closed her eyes for a moment, clearly struggling between her legal rationality and the emotion that the situation aroused. "Let's do this," she said finally. "I'll use my contacts to speed up the regularization process. But Damien, you need to understand that this may not work, and if it doesn't, you'll have to prepare to let her go. And if I refuse, then you could lose not only Iris, but also face criminal charges, and then you won't be able to help anyone." That afternoon, while Valerie made calls and prepared documents, Damien took Iris for a walk in the garden. The girl was quieter than usual, clearly worried about the conversations she had heard. "Damien," she said, stopping near a pecan tree, "if I go away, can I come back to visit you?" The innocent question broke his heart. "Iris, we're going to do everything we can for you to stay here, but if for some reason you have to go, I promise you'll always have a place in my life. And the piano? Will I be able to play the piano in the new place?" Damien couldn't answer. Immediately, the truth was that he had no idea what kind of facilities a regular shelter would offer for the development of Iris's exceptional talent. It was at this moment that Beatrice appeared in the garden, her face wearing an expression of concern. "Damien, you need to take an urgent call. It's Cassius from the Gin. Says it's about the old documents you asked him to look for." Damien frowned. He had asked the accountant to locate some records of former employees, part of an audit he had been planning for months. But why would Cassius seem so urgent about it right now? When he answered the phone, Cassius Bennett's voice sounded strangely tense. "Damien, about those files you asked for. I found some interesting things. Very interesting. I think it's best if we talk in person, and it might be good if you come alone." Damien arrived at the Cotton Gin in the late afternoon, finding the administrative building almost empty. Cassius Bennett was waiting for him in his office, surrounded by piles of old documents and yellowed files. The accountant, a man of 55, with grey hair and reading glasses hanging around his neck, seemed visibly nervous. "Thanks for coming so quickly," Cassius said, gesturing for Damien to sit down. "I found the files you asked for about former employees, but, well, some things caught my eye." Damien observed the piles of papers on the table. "What kind of things?" Cassius picked up a specific file, his hands trembling slightly. "Remember Sebastian Taylor? Worked here about 8 years ago, was fired for financial irregularities." "I vaguely remember. Why?" "Well, I was reviewing his documents when I found this." Cassius handed over a yellowed birth certificate. "It's for his granddaughter, a girl named Iris Taylor." Damien's blood ran cold instantly. He took the document with trembling hands, confirming what he already suspected. It was Iris's birth certificate. The same girl who was in his house was the granddaughter of the man he had fired years before. How did you get this? Damien asked, his voice hoarse. It was in Sebastian's personal files. Apparently, he used the company as a reference for some of his granddaughter's documents when his daughter passed away. Cassius paused, observing Damien's reaction. You know this girl? Damien didn't answer immediately. His mind was processing the implications of this discovery. Iris wasn't just an abandoned child that he had helped out of compassion. She was directly connected to his past, to one of the most difficult decisions he had made as a businessman. Continue, he said finally. Cassius opened another file, revealing financial reports and correspondence. Sebastian always claimed innocence about the embezzlement. He even came to me several times, saying he had been wronged. I never gave him much credit. And now, reviewing everything more carefully, some things don't make sense. Cassius pointed to a series of accounting entries. The embezzlements we attributed to him happened on specific dates, but looking at the timesheets, he was on vacation on at least 3 of those occasions. Damien felt a growing weight in his stomach. You're saying he might have been innocent? I'm saying the evidence against him wasn't as solid as we thought at the time. Cassius removed his glasses and cleaned them nervously. And there's more. I found some correspondence between Sebastian and the girl's grandmother. Apparently, he spent the last years of his life trying to clear his name, mainly because of his granddaughter. Damien took one of the letters, recognizing the trembling handwriting of an elderly man. Sebastian wrote to Eulalia about his struggle to find employment after the dismissal, about how the accusation of dishonesty had marked him in the small town, and about his concern for Iris's future. My God, Damien murmured. If he was innocent, then we destroyed the life of an honest man, Cassius completed, and indirectly the life of his family. The silence in the office was deafening. Damien reread the letter, absorbing every word of Sebastian's pain. The man had died before Eulalia, carrying the shame of a false accusation and the worry of leaving his granddaughter helpless. Cassius, Damien said slowly, if Sebastian was innocent, who actually embezzled the money? The accountant looked visibly uncomfortable. Well, that's a complicated question. The records from that time aren't very clear, and answer the question. Honestly, we never found out who it was. When we found the irregularities, Sebastian was the employee with the most access to the funds, so we assumed it was him without investigating properly. Damien cut him off, the guilt taking over him like a suffocating wave. When Damien returned home, he found Valerie in the living room, still working on legal documents. Iris was at the piano, playing a soft melody that seemed to reflect the melancholy that hung over the house. Beatrice was preparing dinner in the kitchen, but everyone seemed tense with the uncertainty of the situation. How was it at the gin? Valerie asked, noting her brother's troubled expression. Complicated, Damien replied, looking at Iris. The girl greeted him with a shy smile, unaware that he had just discovered a devastating connection between them. During dinner, Damien observed every gesture of Iris with a new perspective. He saw in her traits that he now recognized: the gentle stubbornness of Sebastian, the sharp intelligence that the old employee had always demonstrated in his work. How hadn't he noticed it before? Iris, he said softly, do you remember your grandfather? The girl stopped eating and looked at him in surprise. Grandpa Sebastian. He died when I was very little, but Grandma always talked about him. What? Did she tell you? That he was very hard-working, that he took good care of the family. But he was sad in the end, because some people said bad things about him that weren't true. Iris lowered her eyes. Grandma said that one day someone would find out that Grandpa was honest. The girl's innocent words struck Damien like knives. He was one of the people who had believed the bad things about Sebastian. He had been responsible for the dismissal that had destroyed her family. Valerie, noticing the increasing tension, changed the subject. "Iris, how about showing me another song on the piano?" Later that night, after Iris went to sleep, Damien told Valerie and Beatrice about the discovery at the gin. The two women listened in silence, absorbing the implications of the revelation. "My God, Damien," Beatrice whispered, "the poor thing is Sebastian's granddaughter." "And if he really was innocent," added Valerie, "it completely changes the situation. It's not just about helping an abandoned child, it's about repairing an injustice." "But it also complicates it legally," she continued. "If they find out you unfairly fired her grandfather, they might question your motives for sheltering her now." Damien ran his hand over his face, feeling the weight of all the revelations. "What do I do, Valerie?" "First, you need to find out the complete truth about what happened to Sebastian. If he was really wronged, you have a moral responsibility to repair it. And what about Iris? That actually strengthens your case for keeping her. If your company harmed her family, you have legitimate reasons for wanting to help. But," she paused significantly, "it also makes everything riskier." That night, Damien couldn't sleep. He stayed in his office, rereading Sebastian's letters and examining the documents that Cassius had found. The more he read, the more convinced he became that he had committed a terrible injustice. Around 2 a.m, he heard soft footsteps in the hallway. It was Iris in her pajamas walking towards the kitchen. He followed her and found her drinking water, her eyes still sleepy. "Can't sleep?" she asked, surprising him with her perception. "Sometimes it's hard," he admitted. "Me, too. Sometimes I dream about Grandma, and I get sad when I wake up and remember she's not here anymore." Damien knelt down to her level. "Iris, did your grandmother ever tell you how your grandfather died?" "She said he got very sick after he lost his job, that he got too sad and his heart stopped working right." The brutal simplicity of the explanation hit Damien hard. Sebastian had literally died of heartbreak, and he had been part of the cause of it. "Do you think Grandpa was a good person?" Iris asked. "Yes," Damien replied, his voice choked. "I think your grandfather was a very good person, and that some people, including me, didn't realize that at the time." Iris hugged him spontaneously, a simple gesture that almost made Damien cry. "Grandma always said that good people recognize other good people. That's why I knew I could trust you." When Damien finally returned to his room, an iron determination had settled in his heart. No matter what the legal or personal consequences were, he would discover the truth about Sebastian Taylor and ensure that Iris had the future that her grandfather had always wanted for her. But what he didn't yet know was that Cassius Bennett hadn't told the whole truth about the documents he had found, and that the discovery of that connection between Damien and Iris hadn't been as accidental as it seemed. 3 weeks had passed since the discovery about Sebastian, and Damien had plunged headfirst into a personal investigation into the past. Cassius seemed increasingly nervous whenever the subject was mentioned, making up excuses to avoid deeper conversations about the old files, but it was Beatrice who made the discovery that would change everything. That Saturday morning, while Damien was taking Iris to an impromptu piano lesson with the retired teacher from town, Beatrice decided to organize some old documents in the house's office. Among dusty papers and old correspondence, she found a box that Eleanor had kept with letters and receipts from when she was still alive. Among the documents were a series of old bank statements from the company, some internal reports that Damien brought home in the early years of their marriage, and something that made Beatrice's heart race. A sealed envelope addressed to Damien with Eleanor's handwriting on the outside, where it was written, "To be opened only if something happens to me." With trembling hands, Beatrice opened the envelope and found a letter dated just 2 days before Eleanor's accident. The letter revealed a devastating discovery that Eleanor had made about irregularities in the company's accounting, specifically about how Cassius had manipulated data to frame Sebastian. "My dearest Damien," the letter read, "I've discovered something terrible about the embezzlements at the gin. Cassius isn't who we thought he was. I found evidence that he planted evidence against Sebastian and has been embezzling money for years. I'm afraid to confront him alone, so I've decided to wait for you to come back from the trip to show you everything. If something happens to me before that, look in the secret drawer of my desk. The evidence is all there. With love, Eleanor." Beatrice ran to the master bedroom, where Eleanor's desk had remained untouched since her death. She found the secret drawer, a disguised compartment that she had known about since the days she helped Eleanor organize her things. Inside was a folder with documents that unequivocally proved Sebastian's innocence and Cassius's guilt. When Damien returned with Iris, he found Beatrice in the living room, pale and surrounded by papers. The girl ran to the garden to play, blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to break over their lives. "Damien," Beatrice said in a trembling voice, "you need to see this. It's about Eleanor, about Sebastian, about everything." Damien read the letter from his dead wife with tears in his eyes. Each word was like a stab in his heart. Eleanor had discovered the truth and died before she could tell him. And he, blinded by the pain of loss, had never adequately questioned the circumstances of the accident. "Beatrice," he said in a hoarse voice, "do you think Cassius—" "I think your wife found out too much," she replied. "And I think her accident wasn't as accidental as we thought." The revelation struck Damien like lightning. For 2 years, he had carried the guilt for Eleanor's death, thinking that if he hadn't traveled that week, if he had been a more present husband, she would still be alive. But now he discovered that maybe she had died because she had discovered the truth about the corruption in his own company. "I need to confront Cassius," Damien said, getting up abruptly. "No!" Beatrice grabbed him by the arm. "If he was capable of doing that to Eleanor, what can he do to you or to Iris?" The mention of Iris made Damien stop. He looked out the window and saw the girl playing innocently in the garden, completely unaware of the danger that might be lurking around their lives. At that moment, the phone rang. It was Valerie, calling from Jackson with news about the process of regularizing Iris's guardianship. "Damien, we have a problem," she said, her voice tense. "Someone made an anonymous complaint questioning your suitability to care for the girl. The judge wants a psychological and social evaluation urgently." "What kind of complaint?" "They say you're using the girl to ease your conscience about something you did in the past, that your motives aren't purely altruistic." Damien felt the world spinning around him. Who would make a complaint like that? "I don't know, but whoever did knows details about your personal and professional life. The hearing has been scheduled for Monday." When Damien hung up the phone, he looked at Beatrice in despair. "Cassius," he murmured. "It has to have been Cassius." "Why would he do that?" "Because he's scared. If I find out the truth about Sebastian, I can find out about Eleanor too. And if I find out about Eleanor—" At that moment, Iris ran into the room, radiant with joy. "Damien, I learned a new song on the piano. Do you want to hear it?" Looking at the girl's innocent face, Damien felt a fierce determination grow inside him. Iris had lost her parents, then her grandfather because of false accusations, then her grandmother who died of heartbreak. She didn't deserve to lose anyone else because of Cassius Bennett's greed and cowardice. "Of course, I want to hear it," he said, forcing a smile. While Iris played a melancholic melody on the piano, Damien and Beatrice exchanged looks loaded with determination. They knew that the next few days would be crucial. If they couldn't expose Cassius before the hearing, they could lose Iris forever. But what they didn't know was that Cassius had already taken the next step in his plan. That same afternoon, he had visited the shelter in Jackson, where Iris would be sent if Damien was denied guardianship, and he had made a generous donation, ensuring that when the girl arrived there, her life would be even harder than on the streets. On Sunday, the eve of the hearing, the tension in the house was palpable. Valerie had arrived from Jackson to follow the process, but her expressions were somber. The case had taken on proportions that she hadn't expected. "Damien," she said during dinner, "I need to be honest with you. The anonymous complaint brought very specific information about your relationship with Iris's grandfather. Whoever did it knows exactly how to damage your case." Iris, sitting next to Damien, ate in silence, but her intelligent eyes captured the tension of the adults. She knew something was wrong, that her stay in the house was threatened. "If I go away," she said finally, her voice small but firm, "who's going to play the piano for you?" The innocent question broke everyone's heart at the table. Damien knelt down beside her chair. "Iris, no matter what happens tomorrow, I want you to know that you are very special. You brought music back to this house, and that's a gift I'll carry forever." "But I don't want to go away," she said, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "Here I have family." Beatrice got up abruptly from the table, unable to contain her tears. Valerie closed her eyes, fighting against her own emotion. That night, around 2 a.m, Damien was awakened by a strange noise coming from outside the house. Looking out the window, he saw a hooded figure near the garden, tampering with something near the entrance. His heart jumped. Someone was trying to enter his property. He woke up Beatrice silently and asked her to stay with Iris while he investigated. Armed only with a flashlight and an iron determination, Damien went out to confront the intruder. But when he got to the garden, he found something that chilled him to the bone. The tires of his car had been slashed, and on the front door there was an envelope with a handwritten message. "Give up the girl, or everyone will find out what you really did to her family." Damien understood that Cassius had decided to resort to direct threats. The battle had become personal, and the hearing the next day would be just the beginning of a war that would determine not only Iris's future, but possibly their own lives. The morning of the hearing arrived heavy and laden with tension. Damien had barely slept, haunted by the threat found on his door. Iris woke up early, and as if she knew the importance of the day, wore her best dress, a light blue one that Beatrice had bought for her, and carefully styled her hair. "No matter what happens today," she said to Damien during breakfast, "thank you for letting me be part of a real family." The girl's words almost made Damien give up fighting. The idea of losing her, of seeing her being taken to a place where she would not be understood or valued, was unbearable. But Beatrice, who had silently become the force behind all the resistance, wouldn't let him give up. "We're going to finish what Eleanor started," she said, handing Damien the folder with all the evidence they had discovered. "Cassius can't continue destroying lives with impunity." In the Harmony Creek courthouse, a small room adapted for special hearings, Cassius Bennett was present as a witness concerned about the well-being of the minor. He wore his best suit and an expression of false concern that would deceive anyone who didn't know his true nature. The judge, Dr. Albright, a man of 60 with a reputation for being strict but fair, first heard the allegations from the prosecution about the irregularity of Iris's situation. The social worker presented reports, questioning the suitability of a single and bereaved man to care for a traumatized girl. "Your Honor," said the prosecutor, "there is evidence that Mr. Blackwood may be acting out of guilt related to his professional past, not out of genuine interest in the child's well-being." It was then that Cassius was called to testify. With a measured voice, and a concerned tone. He painted a picture of Damien as an emotionally unstable man, not yet recovered from the loss of his wife, using Iris as a form of psychological relief. "I've known Damien for over 15 years, Cassius said, his words carefully chosen. Since his wife's death, he has made impulsive decisions. I fear this is another one of them, and that the child will end up being harmed when he realizes that he can't replace a daughter with a social responsibility." Damien listened to every word, feeling his world crumble. Cassius was destroying his reputation and credibility with the same calculated coldness with which he had destroyed Sebastian, and possibly Eleanor. But it was when the judge asked about Iris's family history that Valerie stood up. "Your Honor, I would like to present evidence that completely changes the context of this situation." "What evidence?" "Evidence that my client isn't acting out of guilt, but out of justice, and that the person who made the anonymous complaint has very specific personal motives for removing this child from my client." Valerie began to present the documents found by Beatrice, Sebastian's letters, the proof of his innocence, the records that showed how Cassius had manipulated evidence. The courtroom fell into absolute silence as the truth was revealed. "Furthermore," Valerie continued, "we have this letter written by my client's deceased wife 2 days before her fatal accident." She read Eleanor's letter aloud. Each word echoed through the room as a direct accusation against Cassius, who had turned completely pale and begun to sweat visibly. "Your Honor," Valerie said, "I suggest that Mr. Cassius Bennett be questioned not only about his complaint against my client, but about the serious accusations contained in this correspondence." The judge turned to Cassius with a severe expression. "Mr. Bennett, what do you have to say about these allegations?" Cassius tried to maintain his composure, but he was visibly desperate. These are misunderstandings. Eleanor was confused, maybe stressed." "Eleanor died 2 days after writing this letter," Valerie interrupted, "in an accident that was never adequately investigated." It was at this moment that Beatrice stood up in the gallery. "Your Honor, may I testify?" The judge, intrigued by the growing upheaval, allowed her to approach. Beatrice, with the dignity of someone who had faithfully served a family for years, told about her discovery of the documents, about how Cassius had behaved nervously in recent weeks, and about the threat found on Damien's door the night before. "And there's one more thing," she said, taking a small recorder from her purse. "Last night, after the threat, I decided to call Mr. Cassius, pretending to be a woman interested in information about Damien. The conversation was revealing." She played the recording. On the tape, Cassius admitted to making the anonymous complaint and revealed details about how he had manipulated Sebastian's situation. Even more shocking, he casually mentioned that Eleanor shouldn't have messed with things she wasn't supposed to. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Cassius was completely exposed, his decades of manipulation and corruption finally brought to light. He tried to get up to leave, but the judge ordered him to stay. "Mr. Bennett," Dr. Albright said, in a grave voice, "in addition to determining the situation of the minor, I will forward this case for immediate criminal investigation." Turning to Iris, who had watched everything with her intelligent eyes, the judge softened his voice. "Iris, do you understand what's happening?" "Yes, sir," she replied with surprising clarity. "The bad man who hurt my grandpa also hurt other people, but now everyone knows the truth. And where would you like to stay?" "With my family," she said, looking at Damien, Beatrice, and Valerie. "They taught me that family isn't just blood. It's who takes care of you and loves you for real." The judge smiled for the first time during the entire hearing. "Considering all the evidence presented and the clear need for historical reparation for the damages caused to the minor's family, I grant temporary guardianship to Mr. Damien Blackwood, with regular supervision from social services. 6 months. Later, life in Harmony Creek had been completely transformed. Cassius was convicted of corruption, forgery of documents, and was being investigated for the death of Eleanor. The money embezzled over the years was recovered and used to create an educational fund in the name of Sebastian Taylor. Damien, finally free from the guilt that consumed him, had officially become Iris's adoptive father. The girl flourished, with formal piano lessons and quality education, but more importantly, she had found the emotional security she had never had. Beatrice, whom the judge also recognized as a legal guardian, had realized her dream of being a mother at 45. She and Iris developed a special relationship, full of conversations about music, books, and dreams for the future. On a golden afternoon in December, Iris gave her first official recital at the Harmony Creek Municipal Theatre. The audience was moved not only by her exceptional talent, but by the story of overcoming adversity that she represented. In the program, there was a dedication for Grandpa Sebastian and Grandma Eulalia, who are proud of me up in heaven. After the concert, Damien found Iris in the garden of the house, sitting under the pecan tree where they used to talk. "You know what I found out," she said, looking at the stars. "Sometimes bad things happen so that good things can come along later." "How so?" "If Grandpa hadn't been wronged, if Grandma hadn't been sad, if I hadn't been alone on the streets, maybe we would never have met. And then I wouldn't have a real family." Damien hugged the girl, impressed by her wisdom. "You're right, sometimes life has strange ways of fixing things. And you know what else?" Iris continued. "Grandpa can finally rest in peace. Everyone knows he was honest. That night, for the first time in years, Damien slept deeply without nightmares. The house was full of music again, full of laughter, full of life. Iris had brought more than just her musical skills. She had brought redemption, forgiveness, and the possibility of starting over. The family that destiny had formed through pain and injustice had become a family forged by love, truth, and the second chance that everyone deserved. And in the mornings that followed, the sound of Iris's piano echoed through the house as a promise that, no matter how dark the night, there is always hope for a new dawn.